G'day guys, Mackie with the Circle, and today, getting started in the Horus Heresy, Mechanicum. This is a hard one because the Mechanicum specialises down three different sort of routes. You have like reductor forces, where you have this big focus on siege, tanks, that kind of thing. You also have your Cybernetica, where you have the focus on automata, and of course your Tagmata, where you've got a real focus on just everything, on Mechanicum as a whole. Now, the Mechanicum in 30k is quite different to 40k. They are not the Adeptus Mechanicus at all, as some people like to call them, the AdMech. No, they are their own entity. There is both the Dark Mechanicum and the regular kind. However, there's no real difference at this point, apart from two special characters that come immediately to mind, Dracovic and Scoria, who's about to get a interesting, we'll say, miniature. Now, the Mechanicum in 30k can either operate as part of a legion or giving their units to legions, or they can operate entirely independently, and in fact there are several campaigns and missions that focus entirely on them within the Heresy range of books. Now, the thing with the Mechanicum is they come in two general flavours, soft and squishy or hard as nails. And when it comes to weaponry, it's soft and squishy or hard as nails as well. You'll find that often the weapons either don't hurt units that they're targeted at all, or the weapons are so ridiculously strong that they can kind of carry the game for you. You get units which become able to multitask and cover a wide range of options, but at the expense of costing a lot of points. So there's a bit of give and take. Now, when it comes to trying to build a list for people who are getting started, I want to go down the Tagmata approach. This is sort of an all-encompassing suggestion, but I will give a few sort of options to people if they want to go down the reductor path, or if they want to go down the sort of more traditional path. Anyway, let's get into it. A few things to note first. Basically, all of the large units require a Cortex controller. Now, the best way to sort of summarize this for those who are used to 40k is that consider it as something kind of like Synapse range on Tyranids. So if the Mechanicum's automata, such as the Castellax or the Automata, Thanatar, that kind of thing, if they're not within range of a Cortex controller, they kind of want to do their own thing. Whereas, if they are in the range of the Cortex controller, you basically get to do as you wish with the unit. And of course, sniping of Cortex units, that kind of thing, is a common practice by Legion players to try and disrupt the Mechanicum. And of course, Mechanicum players will try and hide those units and use them to best effect. Another thing to keep in mind is that there are several units, such as the Myrmidons, which, although I think are great units, fantastic units in fact, I don't want to include them in this because you don't get the full range of weapons necessarily that you want, and often the weapons have changed in stats, we'll say, from their original sort of outing, and at the moment they're not in a good place for a lot of people. But anyway, I digress. So the first place you want to be looking, obviously, is rules. And when it comes to rules, Mechanicum has the Tagmata army list. Now, this book is ever so slightly out of date. Yes, it's relevant, but there are a couple of new units which have been released since it was last updated. So it doesn't cover everything you need. You will at least need book 7, and maybe even also book 6 in order to get everything together. But this is a really good starting point for basic lists. Now, when it comes to the HQ, one of the options disappeared from the Forge World web store, and that's a bit of a downside. So instead we have the option of a really expensive character series model in the form of Dracovic, which, yes, does come with a Abeyant, which is sort of this floating tendril platform that he's on. Or you can, of course, mount him on foot without the use of the Abeyant. Up to you what you pick. Me personally, I would not go with this as my starting model for my army. It's a bit too big, complex. more than you need, especially if you're playing low points games. Instead, I would suggest taking a Magos Macrotech Engine Seer, because at least you get the servitors and you can use him as an elite's choice if you upgrade your force down the line. He is appropriate to use as a HQ, although he is quite minimalist compared to a lot of the Mechanicum's options. My pick of the litter, however, is actually the Games Workshop Tech Priest Dominus. Now, this miniature is of course plastic, and you can quite easily convert it in order to arm it with more 30k appropriate weapons. As it is, brilliant model, and I use several of them in my armies for my Mechanicum, because I think he's great. Now, that's basically it for your HQ options. Thing is, when it comes to HQs in the Mechanicum, they're kind of like the Centurions are for Space Marine Legions, in that you have a host of different types you can kit them out as. Perhaps you want to kit them out to be a shooty guy, or an assassin type, or want to look after your monstrous creatures and automata. There's lots of different options you can go down the route of, and I don't want to tell people what to pick. You will find it out for yourself, but start out basic, get a basic Magos, a simple Mechanicum list together. The next step I would take is a Phalanx Cohort. This single kit gives you up to 3 different troop squads if you want to run them in minimum squads of 3. The lightning guns they have are not long ranged, but they're a decent strength and they have rending. Also, the Phalanx as a whole are a tough unit. They only have a 4+ armor save, but they are toughness 5 and 3 wounds, and they have jetpacks. If you add some special weapons onto them, such as photon thrusters for example, things like that, then obviously the unit is going to be a lot tougher and will focus very much like Crisis battlesuits. Also, Mechanicum Tech Thrall Covenant. Now, whether you get them with Laslox or Mitralox doesn't really matter. This is one of those units that is really soft and squishy and doesn't have a high damage output. But they're cheap and they're a scoring unit. So something to consider, especially if you're putting a lot of points into big nasties. Definitely look at Tech Thrall Covenants as a way of sort of filling in numbers in your army without using heaps of points. So as mentioned, here is the Mechanicum Phalanx Cohort with a Photon Thruster. There's also the Phased Plasma Fusel, the Multi-Melter Irad Cleanser, which I think is just gone last chance to buy, unfortunately. But Photon Thruster, good anti-vehicle weapon. I also suggest the Phased Plasma Fusel. So they've got a bit of options, and essentially, yeah, they do operate like Crisis battlesuits. Now, if you're going down the path of Automata, the first one generally people will come across is the Castellax. Utterly broken when it was released because it was a scoring troops choice with no restrictions, a monstrous creature, toughness 7, mostly 6s for its stats, low on the attacks. Now, the thing to remember with Castellax is they hit like a brick if they charge. If they're not charging though, generally they only swing with 2 attacks, so they're not too terrifying. But if they charge, they have rage, so that hurts. The basic weapons loadout is 2 flamers or 2 bolt guns in the wrists, and a Mauler pattern bolt cannon, which is essentially a strength 6 AP3 heavy bolter. Very nasty bit of kit. Shorter range though, 24 inches, but can be upgraded to multi-melters or to darkfire cannons. So another sort of anti-vehicle lance weapon. Very strong weapon, but again, start to sink a bit of points. Currently, the Castellax are no longer scoring troops units, and they can't be your compulsory troops choices. That is overturned, however, if you're playing in a Legio Cybernetica list. Now, pros and cons. Hits hard. Con, lots of points. You take your pick. What suits you best. Obviously, it needs that Cortex controller nearby, or else it's going to run off and do its own thing. On that same note, I find the Vorax are a really dependable option in your armies. They have lots of attacks, they have power blades, so they have rending, they have AP2, they can also take things like Irad cleansers, they have lightning guns, rotor cannons, which you want to give poisoned rounds to, trust me. They have a lot of firepower output, but it's very low damage. So any little boost you can give to that will be great. And of course, they have the ability to just run up fast, moving that 12 inches, close the distance with enemies, and really chop into them, which a lot of your other automata can't. Now, do keep in mind, they aren't as tough as the Castellax, so there is the trade-off, the worse armor save and the worse toughness, obviously being the two key takeaways, but you're still looking at a toughness 6 unit with 3 wounds and a 4-up armor save, so not terrible. Another popular option is the Voltarax. This thing is still considered pretty much broken by anyone but Mechanicum players. Essentially, it's a flying monstrous creature, and it has a 3-shot haywire gun mounted to its nose, as well as 2 twin-linked Havoc missile launchers. It is very large, by the way, about the size of a Rhino tank, and you can get them in units of up to 3 off the top of my head. Again, needs to be within Cortex range to get best use, but this thing is utterly devastating to vehicles, especially the super heavy kind, because all you need to do is roll a 2 or more to cause that instant glance on a hit. So, yeah, pretty nasty unit. Absolutely terrible in close combat, and yes, because it's a flying monstrous creature, you can drop into hover mode and charge units. If you do, you're doing something very wrong unless you want to tie up a unit for a long time, because, like the Castellax, they're a high toughness unit. Interesting, they also have a flare shield, so a little bit of extra survivability. Now, if you are looking for something in the heavy support market, I would suggest the standard Mechanicum Thanatar. Now, again, relies on having that Magos nearby, but the plasma mortar on its back is one of the most devastating weapons in 30k, if not for the fact that it makes you reroll successful cover saves, and it's a giant plasma weapon, so most units will only at best get a cover save against it. Terminators, yeah, you might be lucky to get an invulnerable, but that's about as good as it gets. And it also has a twin-linked Mauler pattern bolt cannon in its wrist, just for laughs. Don't be stupid and charge with the thing, however. The Thanatar hits like a pillow in close combat. Yes, it's toughness 8. Yes, it has high strength, high toughness, but it's got terrible amount of attacks. And it's only got 4 wounds. So, a couple of las cannon shots, that kind of thing, will wear it down really quickly. Most people like to hide him out of line of sight and just lob the rounds out of cover. Very viable tactic. If, however, you find you don't want to go down the monstrous creatures route, I would suggest perhaps taking the Mechanicum Krios Venator and the Mechanicum Krios Battle Tank. Now, these two tanks are very different to one another. The Venator is basically a weapon that's very similar to a plasma weapon in function. That same strength, AP, very good at melting Terminators, power armor, that kind of thing. But there is a bit of a trade-off with that. You're paying a lot of points for it. Not enough points in my opinion, but you're paying points for it. It's a tough vehicle, it's a fast vehicle. It's very similar to the Sicaran in the Legions, but without having a turret mounted to it. It also doesn't have any other weapons beyond the main weapon. It doesn't have pintle weapon upgrades like multi-melters, that kind of thing. The Krios, on the other hand, is just that saturation firepower. Doesn't have huge amounts of it, but it is rending and it will mess up power armor. So there's a trade-off. Do you want more firepower, or do you want the ability to kill Terminators fast? Choice is yours. Another viable unit is the Medusa or Basilisk, which the Mechanicum can take. You don't see it too often, and they don't have their own model for it. And as you can see, it is quite different to other Mechanicum tanks in styling. So, why would you take it? Well, it gives you that ordnance ability, especially something like Demolisher Cannons, a way of killing Terminators, the things that will really hurt your Automata, and things that will just munch through things like your Thalax. So, I suggest the Solar Auxilia one, only because it's the cheapest option, and it does look pretty cool. There's plenty you can do with it. Up to you what you pick. You could pick the Armageddon pattern, or even a Legion pattern, Basilisk or Medusa. But another pro of this is that it is a Basilisk or a Medusa. you're not locked into which gun you get both weapon options. So it's a bargain buy, in other words. You get the best of both worlds. You can figure out what works for you. Now again, not for everyone. And of course I previewed it a few seconds ago, but you have two dedicated transport options. Mechanicum Triaros Armoured Conveyor, which is a tough transport, not quite land rated tough. Very good, however, at taking hits in the front and has bonuses to things like ramming. On the other hand, the more expensive option is the Mechanicum, which is, for all intents and purposes, a Land Raider. But a Land Raider Proteus, so no frontal assault ramp, it has instead only got the side access points. Up to you what you choose. Both have a decent transport capacity, neither of which, however, is capable of transporting the Automata, so you're looking at only moving things like Myrmidons or Thalax in small numbers, because they are quite a bulky unit. You could also move tech thralls in them, up to you. But if you're playing an armoured force, Triaros and Macrocarids used together, as well as some Krios tanks, really works out for you. And of course, if you're going down the route of Automata, it's Vorax, Castellax, Voltarax, and of course, the Thanatar. There is another type of Automata I haven't mentioned yet. There is the Thanatar Calyx, and there is the Domitar, neither of which are user friendly, so I've not included them in this getting started video. So that's pretty much it for Mechanicum. It's one of those armies where I can't tell you how to play it. You've got to find what approach works for you. Do you want to have those big, hard-hitting, monstrous creatures charging around the battlefield? Do you want to go for that armoured spearhead, lots of tanks and artillery? Do you want to swarm your enemies with hordes of cheap, basic bitch infantry? I don't know. The approach is totally up to you. But do remember, all these options shown today could be put into the one list under Tagmata. You don't gain any real benefits to doing so, but you get a bit of everything, if you don't want to go down the specialised route. And hey, right now, the way Mechanicum works, you can make anything you like. And do remember, Dark Mechanicum is coming, so you're going to see some weird shit soon. But honestly, the best advice is just to buy a few of these units, buy a HQ, buy Thalax. Honestly, they're the best troops option you've got. This £90 bundle will get you 3 troops choices, and for about, I think, 150 points a unit. So right here is essentially 450 points automatically catered for your army, and then probably another 150 on your tech priest as well. So between those two units, you've almost made up half 1,000 points straight away, a bit more, 600 points, and then you can just add a few other items to it, like maybe a Krios Venator, to get you across that 1,000 point line. If you're going into something like Zone Mortalis, I would say probably the Castellax is a good unit, or even the Vorax, to add to that starting force to give you a 1,000 to 1,250 point force to really start out with. Find what works for you, play the army list, see how it actually operates, and then make the decisions about buying the big units, the expensive units, and especially the super heavy units. I'm Mac with the Outer Circle. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time.